Welcome to the WKRG 2024 Hurricane Special. I'm Chief Meteorologist Ed Bloodsworth. Over the next half hour, the News 5 First Alert Storm Team will bring you stories from around the Gulf Coast, getting you prepared for the upcoming hurricane season. We begin with the seasonal outlook. All signs point to a very active Atlantic basin this year. I spoke with a tropical research scientist to explain why and what Gulf Coast residents should take away from the forecast. Get set for an extremely active hurricane season. That's the top line of the April report from the Tropical Weather and Climate Team from Colorado State University. Their forecast calls for 23 named storms, 11 hurricanes, and 5 major hurricanes. One of the big drivers in this forecast, heat.
In particular, in the regions where the storms are initially forming and then maturing, the sea surface temperatures there are really critical for the forecast.
On average, sea surface temperatures are currently outpacing the seasonal average by almost 2 months.
You look at kind of the upper part of the ocean, the amount of heat in that ocean is also much warmer than we've observed over the last 2 decades.
But it is the addition of La Nina this summer that is expected to ramp up development. During La Nina, strong trade winds push warm surface water to the western Pacific. This allows deeper, cooler water to rise in the eastern Pacific. This pattern promotes sinking motion and pushes the jet stream north, limiting wind shear over the Atlantic basin. The ingredients in place now are similar to some of the most active seasons on record, like 1998, 2010, and 2020.
During the April period of time, all of those looked similar to what we have now, and I guess we could say May as well. The month of May, and all of those led to an overly active hurricane season.
And while seasonal forecasts are interesting and certainly grab attention, they should have no bearing on how you prepare year to year.
We're not going to prepare any less because they say it's a below average season. We're not going to prepare any more because they say it's an above average season, because we're already preparing as much as we can anyway.
Most people are going to be just fine, right? And if you prepare for something in advance, you don't have to be as stressed when that moment comes.
After an emergency, you may need to survive on your own for several days. There are some things you should have in your supply kit, whether you're evacuating or sheltering in place. Some of the basics, if staying home, include enough non-perishable food and water to last at least 3 days. Have flashlights, batteries, and an external battery for your cell phone. Have cash on hand, as ATMs will be unavailable after a storm. Some other items include a NOAA weather radio, first aid kit, and copies of important documents and medication lists. If you are evacuating, your kit will include many of the same things, but you may also need a gas can for extra fuel, all medications and medical items, and your phone charger. Make sure you also have proper identification. You may need it to return home. You can find more on what to put in your disaster kit in our 2024 Hurricane Guide.
Forecasting technology and our knowledge of tropical systems has vastly improved over the past few decades. Our team will have new information from the National Hurricane Center to help you stay ahead of the storm. Meteorologist Grant Skinner breaks down what those new products are and ways you can make sure you are getting valuable, accurate weather information.
Tropical systems can strengthen quickly, bringing damaging winds, flooding, and many other impacts. New products and changes from the National Hurricane Center will help our team and our local partners to give you timely information on every storm throughout the hurricane season. Watches and warnings can now be issued during any advisory throughout the day. Previously, they were only issued during full advisories, which only happen 4 times a day. This will help all of us to make vital decisions faster.
When the overnight situation may develop, and a lot of times will have to wait till the mid-morning or the morning advisory, they can get a head start on that now. And that's, with evacuations, EMs, our products, everything, the emergency management, it's all going to help tremendously.
With the NHC also extending their tropical storm force wind forecast from 3 to 5 days, this will improve the lead time for us to let residents know when these winds will arrive. They will also be experimenting with AI to offer all of their text products in Spanish and new rainfall products for the Caribbean and Central America. Later this year, there will also be a new experimental cone graphic that will show inland warnings, which will drive home an important point.
You'll be able to see that the impacts, we don't like to focus on the cone, they could occur well outside the cone.
But with this better technology and universal access to forecast models also comes a lot of weather information being shared on social media.
There are just so many hurricane sites where people, but they oftentimes will show data that's, it's almost more of a scare tactic, you know, where they're trying to get clicks.
So it is important to seek out those trusted sources.
The National Hurricane Center, your local National Weather Service office, the local emergency management, and then of course all the local TV stations. Those people all work closely together, and they're the ones that, you know, put out the information in the first place. So that's the most accurate information, it's the most timely.
For WKRG News 5, I'm meteorologist Grant Skinner.
Evacuating your home can be an intimidating thought, so here are some things to think about before and after evacuation. First, find out if you live in an evacuation zone. Plan how you will leave and where you will go if you're ordered to or decide to evacuate. It could be a hotel or the home of friends or family members. Now, don't forget about your four-legged friends. Make sure your evacuation location accepts pets. Assemble any supplies you will need before you leave and inform any emergency contacts of your plans to evacuate. Only return home once officials inform you that it's safe to do so. Bring supplies such as water and non-perishable food back with you, as power may still be out. If you decide to operate a generator, please be safe. Never operate a generator indoors, in a garage, or under a carport. Having a plan should you need to evacuate. This will help you stay focused and help ease stress.
It's an old but true saying, hide from the wind, run from the water. Meteorologist Lexi Birmingham spoke with local experts to help break down the science of storm surge and inland flooding and why they pose the biggest threats from tropical systems.
Storm surge is one of the most dangerous threats when a hurricane comes your way. Here's how storm surge works. Even if a storm is located well offshore, water levels will begin to rise. This creates rough surf conditions and a higher threat for rip currents. When the storm is offshore, those water levels will continue to rise. This could lead to minor coastal flooding, beach erosion, and some impacts to structures. At landfall is when storm surge is most aggressive, as strong winds and lower pressure push the water inland. That's when major coastal flooding and devastating damage can occur.
It can be anywhere from 3 to 4 feet up to 20 feet, you know, and waves on top of that, and that's a lot of power, a lot of energy.
And just because you don't live near the beach doesn't mean you're not susceptible to storm surge.
It can wind up well up into the bays as well, and if you're in an area that can be inundated and below the, you know, the forecast of the storm surge, even if you're well back up in the bay areas, you could be inundated.
For over 50 years, storm surge was the leading cause of fatalities in the United States from tropical systems. But over the last decade, that trend has drastically changed.
The forecasting of storm surge and the good evacuation process that we have now gets people out of the way.
Flooding sparked by heavy and excessive rainfall can be just as dangerous, causing more deaths in the last 10 years than storm surge.
It just catches people. You can get 15, 20, even 30 inches of rainfall sometimes in a hurricane over, you know, just a day or so.
By the time you notice dangerously high water,
and it's too late to really move, and if you're starting to experience issues, there's a good chance that somewhere around your area, you know, is even worse.
And calling for help may not be an option. The best course of action is to evacuate when instructed.
Know what zones you live in, have a shelter, and get somewhere else to go.
And have a plan in place before the storm arrives. Meteorologist Lexi Birmingham, WKRG News 5.
While the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season was a busy one, no storm names were retired. That's the first time that's happened since 2014. Based off the preseason forecast, we will likely make it far through this year's Atlantic storm list. Check it out. Alberto, Beryl, and Chris are the first 3 names this year, with Tony, Valerie, and William wrapping up the first 21. Now remember, the Greek alphabet is no longer used to name additional storms beyond the first 21. In that case, we will name storms using a second supplemental list. That begins with Adria, Braylon, and Caridad, and ends with Tayshawn, Viviana, and Will. Crews with Alabama Power are preparing for the season and are urging Gulf Coast residents to do the same. When a tropical storm or hurricane makes landfall, power outages are inevitable. But there are steps you can take now to limit power disruption when a storm moves through. Cut overgrown tree limbs from your property. If you have a generator, make sure it is in full working order. And remember to avoid power hazards after a storm moves through.
There could be power lines on the ground. We can't always know when the lines are active. And so we want people to stay away from the lines. Don't try to remove any limbs or debris that might be tangled up in the lines. Give us a chance to come get the lines back up, and then you can do any cleanup or repair work that you may have to do.
In the event of a hurricane, residents should be prepared to go at least several days without power. Florida Power and Light is looking to increase storm resiliency to their power grid in Northwest Florida. Our team was there in April when FPL crews were hardening the grid in Navarre Beach by replacing old wooden poles with stronger concrete and steel poles.
The purpose behind the program is to harden the grid to withstand hurricane force winds up to 145 miles an hour and increase our customers' reliability.
Florida Power and Light started their pole hardening project in Northwest Florida in 2020 with an expected completion date coming in 2031. Keep these numbers handy if you need to report a power outage. For Alabama Power, call 1-800-888-2726. Baldwin EMC customers can call 1-800-837-3374 or 251-989-6247. And those with Florida Power and Light can call 1-800-468-8243. To report power outages in Mississippi, call Mississippi Power at 1-800-532-1502 or Singing River Electric at 601-947-4211. Coming up, Hurricane Ivan 20 years later. We look back at the storm's path of destruction and aftermath.
Hurricane-force winds can turn everyday objects on your property into missiles, and water getting into your home can cause major devastation. Preparing before a hurricane can help you manage the impact of high winds and floodwaters. First, set up a meeting with your home insurance company. It's good to know what your policy covers and what it doesn't. If you are a renter, talk with your landlord or property manager about the steps you can take together to protect your property. Cut weak branches and trees that could fall on your house and keep shrubbery trimmed. Protect your windows by installing storm shutters. You can also nail plywood to the window frames when a storm is headed your way. Seal outside wall openings such as vents, outdoor electrical outlets, garden hose bibs, and locations where cables or pipes go through the wall. And finally, make sure all loose objects outside your home are properly anchored and secured. These are just a few ways to protect your home from the storm.
20 years ago, Hurricane Ivan made landfall on the beach in Gulf Shores, Alabama. Meteorologist John Nodar takes a look back.
By the time Hurricane Ivan arrived on the Gulf Coast, it was already a killer. In all, Ivan took 94 lives and did more damage than any hurricane in the previous 100 years. A lot of that damage was in Gulf Shores, where Bo Smith was a young firefighter. As Ivan came ashore, winds were too strong to send the fire trucks out.
And we're just sitting around this fire station, listening to this place start creaking, you know, like what an old ship would do. And we're thinking, wow, maybe we shouldn't be here.
It's 20 years later, and Bo's a battalion chief now. He clearly remembers what happened next when one of the firefighters tried to open a bay door.
And when they opened that door, it sucked all of the fiberglass skylights just straight out. And then part of the roof started bouncing. And it was at that point that we decided it was time to get out of here. And so we grabbed our stuff and we all got in a straight line and we hightailed it to the police department. And we stayed there for the rest of the night.
Ivan formed in the Atlantic near the Cape Verde Islands and quickly became a major hurricane, hitting Category 5 in the Caribbean. It brought death and destruction to Barbados, the Dominican Republic, Grenada, Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, and Jamaica before its first U.S. landfall on September 16, 2004. It looped around Florida and made a second U.S. landfall as a tropical depression in Louisiana. We are right in the center of the watch area, and it's likely that this will be turned into a hurricane warning.
Bayou La Battery officials have closed all the roads into and out of the city.
In the U.S., the damage total was $20 billion with 25 people dead, 8 of those here on the Gulf Coast. Winds at landfall whipped to 120 miles an hour, with a gust of 145 miles per hour recorded over Wolf Bay. Storm surge was nearly 13 feet at its highest, clobbering condos and homes along the coast, cutting a new pass to Lake Shelby and Gulf State Park, and destroying much of the I-10 Escambia Bay Bridge. Inland, the storm brought flooding rains and dozens of tornadoes. Ivan weakened quickly and dramatically to a Category 3 just before landfall, or things would have been even worse. Bo's Firehouse number 1 was wrecked beyond repair and eventually torn down. These bay doors were rebuilt stronger. The whole firehouse was rebuilt stronger. In fact, everything in Gulf Shores was rebuilt stronger. Less than 2 weeks after Ivan, the City Council adopted new, tougher building standards.
I just built my parents a home. In fact, they moved in 2 weeks ago, and it had to be built to a 150 mile an hour wind load, which means a lot of bracing, a lot of extra expense, a lot of window covers, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it's the right call because it keeps the devastation down, which means your recovery is a lot faster.
Meteorologist John Nodar, News 5.
If a storm impacts your community, you will likely want to start the recovery process as quickly as you can. Safeguarding critical and important documents now can help in that effort. This includes birth certificates of you and your family, social security cards, and passports. Have your health and medical documents stored together. This includes insurance cards and medication lists. Any documents pertaining to your home, like property insurance and mortgage information, should also be included. And don't forget your pets. Have proof of ownership, ID tags, and other documents related to your pet stored together. Paper documents should be stored in a waterproof bag or case. You should also store electronic copies on flash drives or the cloud. Recovering from a storm can be a long process. Having these important documents ready to go will give you a head start.
Now, we talk a lot about people and protecting people from hurricanes, but don't forget about your animals. Meteorologist Caroline Carithers has some tips for you and your pets, but also brings us a story of how our local zoo goes above and beyond to keep our animals safe.
The water would actually be lapping into the second stories.
20 years ago, Hurricane Ivan made landfall in Gulf Shores.
Saying that the storm surge could be anywhere from 10 to 16 feet.
Some evacuated and some rode out the storm. A location that was in Ivan's direct path, the Alabama Gulf Coast Zoo. At that time, it was located right at the coastline. Zoo employees knew they had to evacuate the animals to keep them safe.
So the animals were all crated up, put into various size crates, and put onto semi-trucks and trailers and a variety of vehicles.
The 265 animals made the trek further inland to stay at zoo employees' homes.
Everybody was relieved, but that's a huge undertaking.
The zoo ended up being heavily damaged in under 14 feet of water in Ivan's wake. Not one animal was harmed thanks to the zoo employees that evacuated them.
Thankfully, in the time between Ivan and Sally, we were able to obtain this piece of property. This was donated to us by the Weir family. The funding was obtained to build the new zoo.
The zoo's new location is now further inland, and it was built with specific holding areas to protect animals from hurricanes. It opened in March of 2020. Hurricane Sally made landfall just a few months later. All of the animals stayed safe and sound. Well, even if you don't have lions or tigers, giraffes, or even a possum, and let's say you have a dog or a cat, you still have to prep your pet for hurricane season.
Have identification of your pet, your cat, your dog, picture ID, microchip is great.
Also remember vaccine records, medications, and 2 weeks worth of food and water, even if you're evacuating.
So have a place to go way ahead of time. Make sure they accept pets or you've got friends and family to stay with.
When our next hurricane bears down, don't forget about your animals so your house does not become a zoo. Alongside photojournalist Nicholas Johnson, I'm meteorologist Caroline Carithers, WKRG News 5.
Still ahead, our final thoughts on hurricane season. A final thought tonight as we head into what will likely be a very busy hurricane season. Truth be told, it's been a while. The last storms to have any significant impact on our part of the Gulf Coast struck in 2020. Since then, our region has experienced some significant growth, which continues today. But as the mayor of Mexico Beach, Florida told me 6 months after Hurricane Michael, we live in paradise, but once in a while, Mother Nature comes to collect the rent. Bottom line, have a plan now. One way to stay ahead of the storms is our free WKRG weather app. Download today on the App Store or Google Play. You'll find links to storm tracks, satellites, and weather warnings. You can find more hurricane preparation tips by downloading our 2024 Hurricane Guide. You'll find evacuation maps, shelter information, and so much more. From all of us at WKRG News 5, thank you for spending your time with us. Have a great evening.